Good. Now go ahead and come back into the here and now, into your body, into the room, and onto the call. And I wanted to start today with a quote from Albert Einstein that I absolutely love. There are two ways to live our life. One is though nothing is a miracle, and the other is though everything is a miracle. And so when we think about signs and synchronicities and the things around us, sometimes it can be really easy to write those things off and to, shoo them away, and it's probably nothing. And who knows? There's no absolute way. I know we'll talk about ways of recognizing signs, but there's no absolute way of knowing 100% whether something is a sign or a symbol. But I feel like that quote from Einstein really just is the a perfect mindset to approach it with. If you think of things as, if you look to the world around you as something that's communicating with us, nature, spirits, the things that are happening around us are all little miracles that are speaking to us, and not only to us as individuals, but to us as a collective and as a community and as a species. Then it's just it's a way of seeing beauty and seeing that connectivity in all things. And when we see that, it lifts us up. It lifts our mindset. It lifts our spirits. It's just music to the soul. And so it's a perspective of walking through life, kind of looking for those signs. And I think everybody has the right level of looking. So there are some folks that will see signs and symbols in every teeny tiny little thing. And if that works for them, that's awesome. That's the level of their communication. For folks that are more, I only look for signs and symbols when they're big and bold and obvious, and something literally smacks me in the head. That's okay too. You don't have to spend every moment of every day looking for things, and you also don't have to ignore everything. And then there's all kinds of perspectives in the spectrum in the middle. So I think just finding the right level for you. We don't want to be paranoid about missing signs and walk around with that, am I looking everywhere kind of anxiety. But we also don't want to miss the miracles by thinking that nothing is a sign. So kind of just finding that level that's right for you and what feels appropriate. And the more, just like with journeying and communicating with your spirit helpers, the more you do it, the more you will recognize when it is something that's meant for you, when something's kind of calling to you, giving you a little wave and saying, pay attention here. So just bringing awareness to that will, you'll start to notice the things that are signs or signs for you, something that's speaking to you a little more clearly. And the more that you notice it, the more you'll trust it. And then it'll eschew some of that doubt of what is that really a sign or is that not? But I think for us in the West, in such a science-based, evidence-based culture, there might always be some doubt. So accept that in yourself as well, and don't beat yourself up if that's the case. And if you question things, it's quite common. So I thought that I would start with kind of an example story of something that happened to me, and I feel like I might have mentioned this on another call, so I apologize if you've heard this before, but we'll definitely get into more detail about it. So I had probably 2 to 3 week period of time. It's hard to say. My memory with time is not great, but it was within a short period of time, less than a month, that I had, my washing machine just started flooding. Every time I would turn it on, water would just flood everywhere. I came home from work one day to just an absolute humidity inside, like I suddenly walked into the South in the summer. And it turned out my water heater there was a cord that connects it to the wall that had frayed, and there was just hot water steam just flowing throughout the house. Let's see, the shower stopped having hot water, but I knew hot water was working. And this is like, I can't remember if it was before or after I fixed the water heater, but the water heater was flowing and I was getting it in some areas of the house, but not the shower. We really, really, really want hot water. One of my sinks was blocked and wouldn't get any water at all. The other one also wasn't getting hot water, which was in the bathroom. So there's something with hot water in the bathroom. And then I had a tank that's just sort of a water filter tank that you pour water into, and it filters through all these rocks and things. And it's not plugged in, it's not electric, it's literally just gravity pulling water down. And suddenly I would pour water in and I'd come home a while later and all the water had flowed out, which I honestly don't even know how that's possible. So just crazy things with water not working out in weird ways, and all of us all at once. I mean, not literally all at the same time, but like very short periods of time between them. So, that was a really like smack on the forehead one. That's one that's hard to ignore when there's so many synchronicities, so many coincidences along with the same element. So I was super confused because, and a little bit insulted, honestly, because I'm a water sign. I'm a Pisces, so I'm a fish. I live in water. Water is my element. So I almost felt like I was being attacked by water. Like what's happening here? So yeah, I did a lot of consciously thinking about what's happening and what's going on, and I just couldn't really connect it with anything that I could come up with in my analytical mind, conscious mind, trying to go over it. Um, so I went into a journey and asked spirit to clear this up for me a little bit, which was both somewhat enlightening and somewhat frustrating also, because what I ended up seeing in my journey wasn't an answer. Sometimes I get very straight up answers, just information, here you go, that's the answer, which is very much what I was expecting and hoping for. But what I got was an image, and it was very dreamlike, although this was a waking, sitting up, journey. And there was an old woman, and she was sitting at a writing table, and she was old. I mean, like skeleton. She was skeleton lady with barely skin, and she's writing, and she had a stack of paper that was like paper she was gonna write with, and then the page that she was writing on, and then a huge stack of papers that were like the completed pages that she was moving things over to. And she's just writing, 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 and she's all hunched over in the way that a little old skeleton person would be. And as I got, and she just seemed so into it and so focused and just literally like hovering barely above the page. And when I got closer and I looked at it, she was writing nothing. Her pen or pencil or whatever, quill, whatever it was that she was writing with, nothing was coming out of it. So she was making the movements of handwriting, but it wasn't actually putting anything on the page. And then she'd move it to the stack, and this huge stack of paper with absolutely nothing recorded on it. So, that wasn't immediately clear to me either what that meant. And what can be interesting and frustrating when spirit speaks to us is when we go into journeys and we're asking a little bit more directly than just the world speaking around us in signs and symbols. With journeys, like I said, sometimes you'll get really straight up answers and it's really clear and you know exactly what it means. Sometimes it's almost like, you wouldn't, if you had a kid in school and they're having trouble with an assignment, you wouldn't just take the paper and do it for them and then say, here's your math pick homework, take it back. And, they wouldn't learn anything from that. And so sometimes I think spirit can help us. They'll give us little hints, but they can't tell us straight up because it would take that learning process away from us. And apparently, frustratingly, this was one of those instances. So I sat with that symbol of the old lady writing, and what's happening. She's doing something, but she's not doing what she thinks she's doing, and I just played with that symbol for a long time. And also the symbol of water, which for me, and we'll talk about this, how to work with symbols in a minute, but for me, water is flow. Water is a creative element. It's not the only one, but again, these are just personal assignments to what water means to me. So it's creativity and it's flow are two of the main components of how I think of water. And water was clearly not flowing well in my life. So there was some kind of block in the flow. And at the time, I was literally a paid writer. That was my profession. And I was quite proud of that because I worked quite hard to get to that point. And I was doing better. It was a better, bigger position than I'd ever had before, a lot more responsibility, a lot more money. And so, I was, again, a little bit indignant and frustrated, like I am writing and more people are seeing my writing than ever in my life. But the writing wasn't very restricted. It was, I had a very strict style guide that I had to stay within. Sometimes the creative element that I used was really trying to figure out how to say what I needed to say while still staying within that really restrictive style guide and parameters of what was expected with the writing. So, anyway, long story short, what I came to realize is that I was doing, like the old lady, I was doing what I was, I was doing what I thought I was doing. I was writing and I was kind of chalking that up as like checking the box of creativity in my life. Um, and it wasn't though, it wasn't really creativity. And so what I ended up doing and what made the water stop having issues in my house after fixing one and then having it break again or something else go wrong, is I realized I needed to find a creative outlet in my personal life that was not related to work, that was also not, that was much more free, where I could be creative in something that, and so I bought a bunch of art supplies and started learning how to paint and do mixed media things. And those were things that I had no experience in. So I didn't have, it was kind of fun. You could play at a really beginner's level and expect stick figures, because that's the level that I was at. So, once I started doing that, I definitely felt a shift internally. It felt like that, that flow of creativity was coming through me again, and I felt I hadn't realized that I'd been getting a little bit cranky, mostly in my mind. Hopefully, I don't think it was coming up too much out externally, but in my mind, I was just getting a little crabby and grouchy, and once I started that creative flow again, I kind of that alleviated that a lot. So that's one example, and it wasn't something simple. It wasn't something that I came to easily. It was very clear to see that there was a sign going on, that somebody was trying to tell me something, but the answer wasn't a straight line necessarily, and it took a little time and a little journeying and a little playing with that symbol. So I'll kind of use that as an example as we talk about different things coming up. But that's one story. That's a one where the signs were kind of obvious there, and then there's a lot of more subtle signs and symbols and synchronicities that happen. But there's generally kind of three ways that that I think of that we can see signs and symbols in our life. So one is looking at the world as a mirror, and so that's what we create internally. We're creating the life that we see around us, and it's reflecting us back to us. And those are really great places to learn and grow. And so there's signs and symbols that are sort of our own making. And then there's spirit speaking. So there's times where your guides will be trying to give you information, a warning, a help, a pointer, something. And then there's dreams, which I think we all sort of recognize as symbols as well, and are speaking to us in that symbolic language, and that we can use also in our everyday lives. So we'll talk about each one of those. Does anyone have questions so far? Okay, so we'll start with kind of the world as a mirror. One of the best ways to notice things that that are speaking to us of our own creation, that are things to change. So obviously, if you're happy about the things that you see around you, no need to change. Appreciate it, enjoy it, offer gratitude and love. But then we have things that we don't like to change, and those tend to show up in patterns. And so nod your head if you've had the same type of person show up in your life again and again. Not the exact same person, but maybe you had a really terrible teacher, and then your first job was a really similar boss, and just that. Or maybe you've dated the same type of person over and over, even though totally different human being, but oh my gosh, here it comes again. So those kinds of things that's with people. We draw into us people that will repeat our patterns until we realize what we need to learn and move past them. But they don't have to be through people. They can be a lot of other things. You can have the same type of job where you got a different job trying to get away from XYZ, and then in the new job the XYZ is there but in a different format. So that's another way that you can kind of see those things. But what the common denominator in all of those different people or those different jobs is us, right? We're the ones that work the different jobs. We're the ones that were unhappy with these XYZ things. So when you look at the world as a mirror and kind of see it as signs and symbols, then it can help you figure out what's going on in your internal world, and you can help find out, you can help learn and grow and things like that. So another example story, this one didn't happen to me, but it's a story I heard from someone else, is there was a couple who were having just an impasse. Like they'd been doing okay in their marriage and just got to a point where um, there's just an issue where they couldn't get past, and they just kept butting heads and kept butting heads. And the more they did it, and the more neither one of them would, secede their point or whatever, the worse it got, the bigger the resentment got, to the point where, they were just living in a house together, where just at the boiling point, just ready at that boiling point. And one day they were home, both of them, in the middle of a raging argument, and they heard this huge explosion. And it was the water heater in their, I think it was the water heater. Do water heaters explode? Something that holds pressure. I think it was the water heater in their garage, literally just popped. Like the pressure had built, and it popped, it blew up. Not in a way that their house didn't blow up. Everybody was okay, but just, parts and water and everything flowing everywhere. So that's kind of an example of their own making. That's something that it probably wasn't, and there's no way to say definitively, but it probably wasn't spirit speaking to them. It might have been, it's possible. But I think that's a good example of a time where just the environment, the internal situation was creating something externally. It's literally showing them they're at the boiling point and things are about to blow, which is right exactly where they were. So that's kind of another example of how we create things around us. So when you see things, especially repeating patterns, and the repeating patterns, it's hard to talk about this because it is really hard to know when something's coming from your internal life that you're creating versus spirit. But I would say the kinds of repeating patterns that we keep sort of getting ourselves into, like I said, you start a new job and you hate the same things about that job that you thought were going to be different, or you have another neighbor and they're doing the same things you don't like about the neighbor in the last neighborhood, or you know what I mean? You always have one friend that's just annoys you in this one way, and then that person moves away and you meet someone else and they start doing it. Those tend to be the kind of patterns that we create for ourselves. And in those cases, it's the way to sort of grow or figure out the pattern or the signs and symbols is to really look at your perception and your perspective on the inside. So seeing them as a mirror, and we tend to, it's really hard to look at someone we don't like and think that they're reflecting something in you, because you're not that way. If you were that way, you would like that thing about them, but you don't like that thing about them. But there's either an attitude that you are holding that is similar, or and that might be a very suppressed one, or you have a strong belief that is the same as that person. So for example, if you have a belief that, people just don't like me, like, I'm just not very magnetic. People tend to be friends with me for a little while and then they go away. So, that's sort of a belief that you have, and you may not even be aware of it. It might be a deeply held subconscious belief. But if you keep meeting people and it seems like they're going to be a great friend, and then before you know it, they just stop calling for no apparent reason, and that's a repeating pattern that happens. It may not be that you are that way. You might not be the kind of person that makes friends and then starts to ignore them after a period of time, but you might have a deeply held belief that that's how people are. And so that is how people are. That's how they're showing up. So does that make sense? Kind of. So if you see those repeating patterns and you think they might be internal, even if you don't know whether they're internal or not, the place to start is this thing that I don't like about this person or this situation, is it something that's reflective of me? Is it something that I don't like in myself? Do I hold that same pattern, that same attitude? I know one person that is the flakiest person I know, that constantly complains about other people's flakiness. And I don't know whether she realizes that she's very flaky or not, but it irritates her to no end, when people flake out, and she cancels plans constantly or doesn't show up, or, last minute changes and things like that. Says she'll do things and then doesn't. So first, try and take an honest look at yourself. Is this something that I do? And if it's really, truly 100% not something you do, then ask yourself if you have an internal belief that creates this thing around you. Is there something I believe about myself? People just don't treat me well, or people are mean, people are whatever. And that's creating people being mean to you, So that's a good place to start with figuring out those repeating patterns. Any questions so far? Um, and then, the best way to release those, if you have those beliefs, if are you guys familiar with tapping? Nod your head or shake your head if you know about tapping. Okay. It's also called emotional freedom technique. You can Google it if you're watching this later and you don't know what it is. There's tons and tons and tons of videos, but it's basically using pressure points around the body and you're just tapping on different parts of mostly your hand and your head. In upper torso. And that's a good way to just release beliefs. And like I said, there's tons of information, so I won't get into it in detail here, but that's a good way to release some of those beliefs. Of course, hypnosis is a way to go in and release those beliefs and repeat them. But another way that's really important is just watching our self-talk. Often without realizing it, we reinforce our beliefs with our thoughts every minute of every day. And so it can be hard to switch our beliefs. It's hard to, if you believe people are mean, it's hard to just say people are great and then suddenly believe it when you're saying that. So I like to throw in the statement, what if it's possible, in front of whatever the affirmation is. So what if it's possible that people are kind? What if it's possible that some people are kind? What if the people around me are the ones that are kind? Just kind of starting that self-talk and just shifting that a little bit will help you replace some of those beliefs a little bit over time. So any questions on that? Okay. Oh, another thing to do, and this is one of my favorites, and this might be familiar to some folks that have worked with me, is bringing the parts that if you don't like a part of yourself. So in other words, if you are creating something around other people or in your world around you as a repeating pattern because of something you don't like about yourself, bringing that into the heart space. So whatever that thought is, so let's say flaky, let's say people are so flaky, and then you come to realize, oh my God, I'm so flaky. Then just think about that flakiness, the feelings of being flaky, the shame, the whatever it is that you feel around it, and just bring that into your heart and just offer it spaciousness and love in your heart and acceptance. And there's going to be some people that hear that and say, if I love and accept my flakiness, then I will always be flaky. How am I going to change if I love and accept it? But I think we've all tried really hard to get rid of unwanted patterns in ourselves by hating ourselves and talking bad about ourselves and disliking that part so much. And that never gets anyone anywhere. So just love on that part of you, accepting that part of you. It doesn't mean that you never want to change that part, but loving and accepting often really starts to loosen up that shadow part of us, that part of us that we're trying to change, that we're just holding down with our thumbs so tightly that it honestly can't change because we've just locked it and we're just holding on to it so tightly. So bringing it into heart space, breathing into it, just giving it love and acceptance, and just allowing yourself to be who you are for a minute can often just shift that, or at least bring up information of why those patterns are there, why they're so ingrained, and even how you can change them. So any questions on that? Okay. So next we'll go into when spirit speaks to us. And those are often those things that we would call coincidences. We've all had, so remember we talked in a previous call about courting. There are some people that we're courted or connected to on an energetic level. So sometimes those coincidences, like you're thinking of someone and they call, you're thinking of someone and they email, those types of things. You're thinking of asking your friend to go to lunch at XYZ restaurant and you get an email from them to go to XYZ restaurant. Those are often just because you're courted. So sometimes coincidences, especially involving other people, are just because you have an energetic exchange with those people. And one of you, and who knows who's thought of it first, one of you is thinking about something and that information is coming through that energetic cord and connection. So sometimes that's what those synchronicities are about. But outside of that, people, we all know what a coincidence feels like. We all know what it's like when, your hairs kind of stand up on the back of your neck. Those moments where just something, you were just talking about something and now it comes up in another, totally different place in time. I've had times where I've been journaling something and the radio's on, and at the exact same time, they say the same exact sentence that I just wrote. And, short sentences, we're not talking about like long, complicated sentences, but they'll say something, or even just a couple of words that I wrote. And at that moment, I just have to pause and think, like, what's going through my mind at that moment? What am I writing about? Just those kinds of, we all know what a coincidence looks like, so I won't go too much into that. But oftentimes that's spirit speaking. Um, Sometimes it can come through nature too. So looking for times when animals are acting strange. It could be seeing an animal that's in an unusual area. I won't call anyone out, but if you want to later talk about if someone on this call has had some cool things show up, that seems synchronistic. But when animals we don't normally see are suddenly there, or when they're acting really weird. I had a crow hit me in the head while I was running once, twice, three times actually. No, yeah, he kept. I'd turn and I'd start running again, and he kept bopping me, and I was like, okay. Yeah, so that's unusual. I've never had a crow touch me before, let alone like smack me three times. So again, like, what am I, I had a podcast on. So what's going on in the podcast? Is there something that they're saying in that podcast that I should, is a particular message for me? Is there something that's running through my mind that I need to pay attention to? And sometimes we don't always know right away, but looking for those things, and they don't always have to be natural either. So I'll give one more example of a story that definitely came from spirit, and it was synchronistic. It's almost similar to my water story. Actually, now that I think about it, all my examples have something to do with plumbing and water. That was not planned. So that's how much of a water sign I am, I guess. But another example is a friend of mine had her plumbing in her house kept clogging, and she kept having them, come out and fix it, and then it would clog again. And every time they're like, this shouldn't happen again. There's no reason. She lived alone. She didn't have kids. There's nobody like flushing socks down the toilet or anything, like there's no reason for it. And it kept happening, and it kept happening. And at the same time, she realized that multiple people in her lives kept talking about colonoscopies. And, that's not a thing that you talk about on everyday life. And that's not things that people talk about all the time. But she'd be, again, listening to radio, and then there'd be somebody talking about that. And she'd be at a grocery store, and there'd be like an ad for it, on a magazine or some article about it. And it just kept showing up. People were talking about it. And finally, she got an email from her doctor, like prompting her to come in for one, which is not normally something that happens. Her doctor doesn't normally send emails and prompt for things, but it's like, it's time for your annual colonoscopy, which she'd never had before. And she was relatively young. She wasn't quite at the age where that was becoming a thing where it's standard to start getting them annually, or however often you're supposed to get them. And so she went in. She's like, all right, the universe is speaking. I'll go in. And she did end up having some kind of tumor, some kind of something that they removed that was small enough that it was just at the edge of like not becoming anything. So it basically, if much more time had gone on, it would have become cancer. It would have spread. It would have become a whole thing. She would have had to have had radiation and chemo and all the treatment and everything. But it was right on the edge where just what quite hadn't spread, quite hadn't, I don't know, whatever, metastasized, whatever it was going to do. And so she had it removed, and it was like just in the nick of time is basically what her doctor told her. So, so that's a time that, again, it wasn't nature speaking necessarily, but there was something that kept popping up that was a message. And can you kind of see how that might be different than the way that an internal message is reflecting something to us? If I'm flaky and I keep getting irritated with people flaking out on me, is slightly different than seeing colonoscopy everywhere you go, and your pipes being clogged at home, and all these sort of metaphors for your digestive tract and something wrong with it. So that's one that she one example of how spirit can speak to you by showing you different themes from different angles. And yeah, so again, you just want to kind of take a look at the symbols and just ask questions. First bring your analytical mind to it. Sometimes it's really obvious, that I don't know that getting your plumbing clogged a lot is going to be obvious that means you need a colonoscopy. But definitely when she started hearing people talking about it, and there's magazine articles, and there, like it's just coming from all directions, that's very specific. It doesn't take a lot of thought process and analyzing to figure out that that's what it's telling you to do. But sometimes it can definitely be more ephemeral and kind of harder to figure out what the metaphor is there. So like everything, the best thing to do to go for answers is to journey. So just have your clear intention and focus when you go into a journey to ask that question and ask your guides. And if the message is coming straight from them, I think sometimes they'll be more forthcoming. I don't know. They weren't on my water situation. So sometimes they'll give you a message to tell you what the message is, which is really frustrating. But it's at least a little bit a little bit more information, a little bit more to play with and to kind of try and figure out. So anything that you're seeing that you think might be a sign, go ahead and journey. That's the first step, and ask what those symbols are. And then I'd say after that, once you've put your analytical mind to it, if you're not coming up with the answer, if you've journeyed and you're getting more metaphor, more symbol, then just try and bring it into the heart space instead of the head space. Kind of feel into it. What are the emotions there? What do the symbols mean for you? Which that's a good segue into dreams. Does anybody have any questions before I move on first? Yes.
So it might be more of a comment, but my son and I have noticed at different times, like glasses and cups will break, or glass seems to be breaking. And we just had that, I guess, a few weeks ago. And, we had it one or two other times too. And so I'm like, I feel like it means something, but
Yeah, that's one to journey on. So maybe I know you had other things in mind, but that might be one to journey on today. Maybe if you have time, if you get an answer really quick on your first one, you can make
I
it
don't
a
think that's
two-parter.
gonna happen.
But I would say journey on that, because it's not something I can answer, but it's
Sure.
definitely that sounds like something like where I get water, you might be getting glass, breaking.
Right.
And things. So journey on that and see. But another way to, when the glass breaks, kind of use that as a pause. And like, what was just happening? If you and your son were just talking, what were you talking about? If you were, just thinking, what was going through your mind at that moment? If the radio's on, the TV's on, like what's happening on those, programs, like what, just kind of looking around you and seeing, because there might be a theme. Sometimes you can, like, you make note of that. So journal that and then wait. And when it happens again, if you're like, oh, both times I was thinking about doing XYZ, like taking a vacation to Europe in August of next year. You know what I mean? If glass keeps breaking at that same time, whenever a certain topic comes up, there's probably something to be noticed about that topic. So,
You keep saying things that are oddly things that I think about, or like the friendship thing you were talking about earlier. Like, I wonder if I have some kind of underlying belief, because I do feel like I have to keep making friends over and over. I mean, I do have some that are longtime friends, but none of them live here. So,
yeah.
you know,
Yeah. So yeah, I'd say start with taking a look at, like, I mean, it's really easy for all of us to get really busy and
Mhm.
not do our due diligence on keeping friendships up and maintaining them.
Right.
So it might be that you kind of let people slip away, especially if they're more peripheral friends instead of like your core longtime friends. Um, so maybe that's a lesson, something that you do. And so it's showing you other people are also, that's how they're doing
Mm.
that to you, not conscientiously, not, as retribution, but
Right.
it's just the pattern that's being created. Or it could be that, yeah, you might have an internal belief that people just don't stick around, or it's hard for me to make close friendships, those kinds of
Mhm.
things. And so maybe, sit with those, like kind of think through some of those statements and see if they hit as true as if they feel, yeah, that's something I do believe. And then try doing some tapping on that, and just see if you can get those beliefs to shift and change a little bit. Yeah, that's cool. The glass thing. Yeah, I
It's not
definitely journey
cool.
on that.
I'm tired of
Not
cleaning
cool.
up glass.
It's not cool, but in a way, yeah, I agree. Like the water stuff happening all around me was a serious
Right.
pain in the ass, but I do appreciate the information. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like I do feel like um so this might be TMI, but I'll go ahead and share. At one point before, like a couple years before that, I had had I had shut down my creative side. It's a really long story, but for a long time, and just decided not to do anything creative. And then at that point, I ended up with a huge, massive tumor in my uterus, and the whole uterus had to be removed. And I feel, when I journey on that and I think about that, I think that that is because that's your creative energy, right? That's like your second chakra. It's creativity. And I had shut that down, and I think that it got really very sick. And it got sick to the point where I couldn't repair it with anything naturally. It was too far gone. And so I ended up having to have a major surgery out of that, which was a terrifying event. It turned out to be fine, but I was like, I'm the kind of person that, if I accidentally cut off a finger while chopping vegetables, I'd go get my sewing kit, be like, I'll put that back on. No problem. I don't go to the doctor. So going in for surgery was like crazy for me. But so that's why with the water thing, when that was happening again, I kind of think that's why it was so intense. That why it wasn't just one thing that stopped working, one sink, one toilet, one washing machine. It was like everything, and it kept going, it kept going. And I think that that's because, again, I was telling myself that I was being creative, but I really, really wasn't. And if I continued to justify the creativity that I was doing in my life, then I could have gotten sick again. You know what I mean? Like I could have had other things happen. And so I'm grateful, even though it was a pain in the ass. I think when things speak to us through science, even though nobody likes to clean up broken glass, and it gets everywhere and you can never find all the pieces and you step on them and all of that. But still, it's something speaking to you. And I think of that as better than walking around with blinders on and walking into walls because we didn't know they were there. Like someone's throwing a rock at us to say, hey, you're about to walk into a wall. It's not pleasant having a rock thrown, but we don't have to walk into the wall now. So, it's something to be sort of grateful
Yeah, maybe we
for.
missed the more subtle, easier signs, and had to
Yeah,
step
exactly.
it up to something that we can't miss.
Yeah, and I'm sure when I was getting sick and developing that tumor, I have no doubt that there were things in my life that were going on that were trying to warn me, and I just didn't know about them at the time or wasn't paying attention. So yeah, I feel grateful that I had to clean up tons of water and have fans drying the flooring and all kinds of craziness. But better that than having to go into the hospital again. So yeah. Um, any other questions or comments or anything? Okay, so I'll go ahead and segue into dreams. So I feel like I said, dreams are kind of that area where we're used to symbols. We're used to that being a symbol of the subconscious and that kind of language, and the way that it speaks to us, which sometimes dreams can be also from spirit. That's one way that guides and things can be speaking to us, is through dreams. Um, and I think probably most people have the sort of are able to differentiate or have had the experience of like a dream with a capital D, like those dreams that you wake up and you're just like, there's either a really big feeling, you have this feeling of like, wow, that was really powerful in some way, or it was very, very vivid and realistic in ways that other dreams kind of aren't. Um, so there's those kind of capital D dreams, and those are ones that are of note, like work with those, figure out what those are. And then we have kind of more the venting dreams where our subconscious is just moving through things that annoy us, or our anxieties are playing out, those little things. I have been dreaming since I was in school about not being able to remember my locker combination and being lost and not finding my class. Why am I still in school? I don't know. How long will I be in high school? Forever, apparently. But I know I get those dreams when I'm just feeling like my to-do list is getting bigger than I can keep up with. And they're not anything big. Those are just natural anxieties. We always feel a little busier than we have time for and things like that. Or I don't know what I'm doing, or I can't find my way. Super typical. So those are just the venting dreams. Those are the dreams where the subconscious is just working through some of the anxieties, some of the fears, some of the whatevers that are going on in our life. um, I would say those are not that they're no big deal. You can still work with them. There's still symbols and signs from your subconscious mind, so you can still work with those to try and realize, okay, I keep having the school dream again. Clearly I'm feeling like I'm aimless or lost a little bit, or I'm not, I'm having anxiety about things that need to get done and I just can't quite get there. Um, I can, meditate on those things. I can do tapping. There's lots of things that we can do to kind of alleviate some of those anxieties in our life. But those are not kind of the dreams that we're talking about today. Today, we're talking about the capital D dreams where something big is happening. And does that make sense? Do you guys both like have those capital D dreams? You know what that feels like versus the anxiety, just or everyday sort of processing dreams where you're people at work or whatever. Everybody has ice cream and nobody got you one.
I wish my son was in this class. He had I guess he said it was a nightmare, and he told me about it. And I wish I knew what it meant.
Well, with dreams, so I'll talk about, so with dreams, one of the ways, whether it's a big D dream or just a regular dream, either way, you kind of work with it in the same way. With the symbols, which is, first you want to start with the emotional template. What's the feeling of the dream? So if the dream is particularly big, like a capital D dream, but it's also terrifying, then there's something big there. There's something, so start with the emotion. That's when, when working with clients and they're talking about a dream, that's always what I start with is how did you feel? And sometimes you don't really know because sometimes the feeling isn't really super obvious, but think about that, like how are you feeling in it? And then what are the major symbols in the dream? So usually there's certain things that stand out, like in my school dream, it's the locker. I can't get my locker open. I'm filling with my locker, or I'm just lost, which isn't really necessarily a thing. It's not a symbol of a physical item, but it's lost. I'm lost and I'm anxious. Like how clear is that, right? That's pretty obvious. So if you start with the emotional thing, and then what are the major symbols? And then here's where this kind of loops back to where I was talking about the water in my house. Everybody's symbols are different. So I advise people against going towards books that define things for you. So, in shamanism, there's lots of people look up like animals. There's lots of books on what animals mean. And I'm not against them. To be honest, I have those too. I have them and I occasionally look at them, but that's my first go-to is always to ask your guides, because those signs and symbols are going to be very specific to you and your guides. And whoever wrote that book is writing either from what they think or from a collective unconscious. But we know that everybody's different. And yes, so and the collective conscious piece is why I have those books, because sometimes I can't find a personal bent. I can't find an angle. I'm not really getting any information extra from my spirit guides. I'll ask them what a crow means and they just keep showing me a crow. I'm like, okay. So then I might go to the books because we are part of the collective unconscious. So if there's a general meaning of things, it might enlighten a little bit. And I would say when you go through them though, and same thing when you're going through dreams, if you're talking them out with people, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but when you're talking through a dream with another person and they're saying, maybe it's this, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, there's kind of this, no, that's it. It's like, just when someone says it, there's just something that you internally that just clicks on it. And you just kind of know there's something more right about that. Otherwise they're giving you all this other ideas and it's like, yeah, I hear what you're saying. Maybe it's that. And if it's kind of a wishy-washy feeling, then probably that's not it. So when you're going through those books, if you are looking through the books on the meaning of dreams or the meaning of, animals and things like that, just go through them with that kind of sense of, don't take it all for verbatim, but just read through. And when there's something that really stands out that like, oh yeah, that's exactly what's happening in my life, or that exactly relates to XYZ situation right now, then take that and consider whether that's the meaning. But otherwise with dreams and actually with the things that are going on around you, you can if you treat the signs and symbols in your outside life the same way as a dream, it'll help you figure things out. So if you just, what's the main theme? What's the main, is there an object? Is there, so for me, it was water not working, right? Water working in bad ways. And then what's the emotion, so for me at the time, the emotion was frustration for sure. And when I think about it now, I didn't recognize myself as feeling frustrated, but looking back now, when you're blocked creatively, or when you're assigning your creative outlet to something that's not very creative and is very constrained and is, a profession rather than something just fun and playful and, discovery like creativity should be, then, that was frustrating. It was, I was feeling frustrated about being so pinned in the way that I had to write and things like that. So, um, yeah, if you can treat both dream symbols and the outside symbols like in the same way, what's the symbol, what's the emotion behind it, and start with kind of building a story around that if you can, seeing if that speaks to any specific situations or circumstances. Does that make sense? Okay. And so the big D dreams, capital D dreams, can be they can be spirit talking to you. They can also just be, I feel like our higher self and our soul and our, our subconscious, they're all one thing. It's not like we're separated into these separate parts, but sometimes that's that bigger, deeper part of us that's trying to say something. Sometimes it can be from spirit. I don't know if it actually really matters where they're coming from with dreams. They're at least they're a little bit easier maybe to figure out. At least I think, because because they're straight up signs and symbols. Whereas when things are happening in our world around us, it's hard to really decipher necessarily if that was our dream, if that was, what if there were other people around? Was that only meant for me? Was that meant for the community? Is it a collective unconscious thing? Is it a yeah, anyway. So any questions on any of that so far? Okay. So I think I talked about everything else in my notes here. Yeah, just looking for literal parallels if they're there. So with the water heater story, with the couple that was arguing, literally pressure building. So again, looking at the symbol and like what's happening in that one. If I were talking to those people and I would say, well, what does a water heater mean to you when it explodes? Oh, what happens with that? Well, a water heater gets too much pressure and then it blows. Okay, is there anything else in your life that has too much pressure and then it blows? Kind of looking at the symbol and what's happening. Like the plumber or the plumbing that was plugged up, what is plumbing? Plumbing is where things internally in the house, they flow and, they flow well. And if they keep getting blocked, then there's something creating a problem with the flow. Again, I don't know that I would have necessarily equated that to my digestive system, but, you can see where there's some literal parallel there. Yeah, so with me, the water wasn't flowing properly. There was something blocked in the flow, which to me, again, creativity is very much related to water and flow. So that's what was being blocked and not working right. It wasn't even being blocked. It was that it was not working right, because that was kind of how it was. I was being creative at work. I was writing, but I wasn't doing it right. I wasn't doing it in a way that like the water was my water wasn't blocked in my house. It was just coming out in all different ways and that it shouldn't. And so that's my creativity outlet wasn't what it should be. So does that make sense? Okay. Yeah. So, and then again, like when you ask for answers on that, if you journey and you're asking spirit for answers and for help, like I said, start with the mind, start with your analytical side and kind of question, what do these symbols mean to me? And what's the emotion there? And are there any literal parallels in my life? But then if you're not getting anywhere with that, just hold it in your heart, just ask for help and then trust that it's going to come. So set your intention to understand, to ask for help and then just sort of let it go and how when you're trying to remember the name of that song or a book that you read and you just can't, it's right on the tip of your tongue. You can't get it. You can't get it. You can't get it. And then as soon as you stop worrying about it, 2 hours later, you're chopping vegetables and boom, the answer comes, out of the blue. That's because, that's when our analytical side gets out of the way and just lets our subconscious mind and our intuitive mind just flow through. So that's why I start with the mind, but if it doesn't work out for you, just ask for help and then just sort of let it go and trust that spirit will let that come to you and then just be sort of open to it. Does that make sense? Okay. And then lastly, with signs is you can ask for signs. So we've been talking all about when signs happen to us and how to interpret them, but we can ask for signs. So some reasons to ask for signs might be to verify something. If you have two job offers and you're not sure which one to take, those sorts of things, decisions in our life, moving different places, whatnot, we can ask for verification. Um, and you can also ask every now and then. I do this and it probably bothers the heck out of my spirit guides, but every now and then I'm just in a kind of a down place, or I'm feeling blue or something, and I'll just ask spirit just to let me know that they're around, just to give me a symbol that they're there. It doesn't need to mean anything, just showing me that they're there. And so when you ask for a sign, it's a good idea to assign a sign. You don't have to do it. Okay, there's two ways you can do it. I prefer to assign a sign, because if I say you give me a sign, okay, let me talk about the first one first. The first one is if you say like dragonflies, like give me a sign where I see dragonflies, then dragonflies if I am supposed to take job A, and I don't know, bumblebees if I'm supposed to take. Now let's make it something totally different, like I don't know, a blue fish if it's a no, or if it's job B. You can assign those different things, and then you just stay open to it, and definitely wait, like look for unusual places. And by that I mean, let's say it's the dead of winter and you're in a place where dragonflies are not around in the dead of winter. That's okay, you can still ask for that sign, because you might be, again, you're at the grocery store line and there's, lo and behold, a book with on the cover is a blue dragonfly or a fish or whatever. And then you'll be listening to the radio, and there's a story about dragonflies and how they're in the decline, or you know what I mean, something like that. You'll just keep hearing those kinds of things, and you'll see it in several places or hear about it in several places, or you'll just be walking in a group of people and hear someone say the word dragonfly, or your friend says, hey, there's a new cafe called Dragonfly Cafe, would you like to go? Those sorts of things. So it doesn't mean that you're literally going to see dragonflies everywhere. Look around and know that they might be in print ads, they might be in things, spoken word, it comes in different forms. So just sort of be open to that. So that's assigning a sign. You're saying, I would like to, for verification of something, if this is the right thing to do, show me dragonflies. That's assigning dragonflies. And then you can also just journey and ask. So, journey and let them know, I would like verification if taking this new job is the right place, the right thing for me to do. And please give me a sign. What will that sign be? And then wait in the journey to see what they show you. And then whatever they show you, that's the thing that you look for and out and around. I tend to like to, maybe I'm a control freak, I tend to like to assign what mine are going to be. Maybe I'm just afraid that I don't know why. Anyway, do you guys, does that make sense? So that you can do it either way. You can ask for the sign, ask them to assign a sign, or you can assign one yourself. But just, again, go into a journey, or you can use your time at your altar to do this, and but again, focus and intention. You don't want to kind of just half-ass, like, yeah, I kind of asked him at one point, like I thought the thought and I'm going to consider it done. You want to like bring in the focus, take some deep breaths, bring yourself into a place where your thoughts aren't scattered, and you're calling in your spirit guides and you're saying to them, I'm trying to decide whether I should leave my job for this new job offer. If that is accurate, if I should do it, please show me dragonflies. I assign a time too. I get really particular. I say, like, I give it a decent amount of time, maybe 48 hours. Hopefully I'm not needing an answer like really, really soon, but give it a couple of days, and then that way you'll be out and doing things, and be able to experience those signs. If you're going to be home for the next 2 hours and you ask for a sign, the chances might be a little harder for them to show you things that you don't already see in your house all the time. So any questions on that? All right.